Good morning. It's time for some stops along the way with Mark McCord. Got my coffee this morning and we're going to jump into it. If you saw my first podcast, this is episode 2 of the podcast, Some Stops Along the Way. If you saw episode 1, you know a little bit about my background, how I got to where I am, the 40-year journey that I've taken in economic development and international development. And we're going to have some fun learning a lot about different cultures, different people, hearing some great stories about things that occurred in my career that may resonate with you, or at the very least make you laugh a little bit. But as I said in the last episode, every journey's got a beginning, and my international journey began in 1997 when I took my first overseas trip for work. And I went to Russia at that time. And it was a really amazing experience. And it started at the Atlanta airport, actually, being an amazing experience because I was scheduled to travel with a good friend of mine whose name will go unmentioned, but he knows who he is. And got to the airport, got checked in for the flight. Remember, this is my first overseas trip in the international development business. I was still running a Chamber of Commerce at the time. So my real job was running the Chamber of Commerce at that time in Lawton, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So this was a 2-week training gig that I signed on to do with the Center for International Private Enterprise. And so I didn't really know what I was getting myself into at all. But what I knew was that I understood the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development business very well, and hopefully I could impart some wisdom to colleagues in Russia and learn something from them besides. But I got to the airport in Atlanta, went to the lounge to find my friend sitting with his head in his hands, like this. His name's Dave, by the way. I won't give you his last name because I didn't get his permission to use his last name. But he's sitting with his head in his hands. I walk up to him and say, "Dave, what's going on?" And he says, "Oh, I've got problems." He said, "Look," he throws his passport to me. I open his passport, I look at it. Doesn't look like him. And I all of a sudden realized what he's done. I said, "This is your wife's passport, man." He said, "Yeah, they were both in a drawer. I reached in and grabbed the wrong one, didn't check it, so I can't go. I messed up. I have to stay here. I've got to go back. I'm getting ready. I was just waiting for you here, and I'm going to go back now and get the right passport, and I'll have to fly out tomorrow." So my first trip to Russia was on my own. I flew to Moscow via Amsterdam. And when I landed in Moscow, Sheremetyevo Airport, and it's changed now, but in 1997, when I flew into Sheremetyevo Airport, this place was, let's say, interesting, to say the least. Think about an airport that Austin Powers designed. That would be Sheremetyevo. It was a product of the Cold War, to say the least. It was dark. It wasn't very modern. And there were still a lot of vestiges of the old system that were left, even in 1997. So I land, get off the airplane, get in line for immigration. And the line's rather long. It's moving very slowly. There are uniformed soldiers with AK-47s standing around. And in the booth is an immigration officer. She's got her very official-looking uniform on, her cap on, and very, very red hair. Kind of a almost a burnt orange type of red hair, and very, very bright lipstick. And she is going at about the speed of a sloth. And so, I just want to get moving. I want to get started. And so I am not very patient, but fortunately, I had been in business class, so I was near the front of the line. And finally, I get to her, and I handed her my passport. And this is where I learned the first thing about Russian immigration in the old days. That is that every day it was like they'd never done it before. She takes my passport. She looks at me like I'm a cross between Bigfoot and a unicorn. I mean, she looks at my picture, that she looks at me. She looks at my picture, she looks at me. She looks at my picture again, she looks at me. She looks at the soldier carrying the AK-47. Then she looks back at my passport picture, and then she looks at me. Then she says something to the soldier in Russian and points to my passport and then looks at me again. Well, by this time, I think that there's some big problem. But she goes through her procedures. She writes something down on a ledger. She looks at it again. She writes some more. She does something else. Finally, she takes that ever important stamps my passport. Well, it's been 35 to 40 minutes by this time since I've landed. And I finally clear immigration. And I'm thinking, okay, well, the upside to this is my luggage will be ready. I'll grab it and go. This is where I learned my second rule of traveling by air to Russia in the old days. And that is nothing worked the way you expected it to work. I walk up to the carousel, there's no luggage coming out. So I think, okay, maybe they've already taken it off, they put it somewhere. No. I asked someone on the flight that I had talked to in the line who spoke English, and he said, oh no, the luggage hasn't come up yet. So we waited, I would estimate another 35 to 40 minutes. Finally, the luggage starts to come out. Fortunately, my bag is one of the first, but this bag looks like it was thrown off a building, then hit by a car, and then mauled by a tiger. I mean, they have done everything that you can do to a piece of luggage without totally destroying it. That's where I learned my third rule of traveling by air to Russia in the bad old days, and that is your luggage really means nothing to them. You get it when you get it, in the condition that you get it, and you don't ask any questions, you just move along. So I grab my luggage, I go through customs, where yes, they wanted to stop, check my bag. That took another 10 to 15 minutes. Finally, I clear that, I get out into the terminal, and my host, Frank and Winnie Dressler, were there to meet me with our Russian driver. We leave Sheremetyevo Airport, and we get in the driver's car, which is a very old Zhiguli 06. Now, if you know much about Zhigulis, they're a very famous Russian automobile made by Lada, and they were very cheap, not particularly well made, but they were very common in those days. You still see some Zhigulis around Central and Eastern Europe. I always secretly wanted to bring a Zhiguli home and just drive around East Tennessee in my Zhiguli and have people wonder where the heck I came from. But at any rate, we get in this old Zhiguli. I'm sitting in the back seat with Winnie. Frank is up with the driver. It is late October, fairly cold. It's even snowed a little bit. Roads are wet. We head into Moscow. Now, this driver, I'm fairly certain, used to either be on the stock car circuit or the demolition derby circuit, because this guy drove like a maniac. And I realized very quickly that his windshield wipers didn't work on that old Zhiguli. The windshield was getting dirtier and dirtier. I didn't know how he could see. I was sitting in the back seat trying to get oriented to my surroundings, but you couldn't see much through the windshield at all. So finally he reaches around to the back seat. He grabs a bottle of what looked like water, but I found out later it was water mixed with vodka. He rolls down the window. He leans out. He squirts this on the driver's side portion of the windshield, reaches out with a rag, wipes it off. That was the version of a windshield wiper. And he did this all the way into Moscow. So we get into the city. I check into the Interest Hotel. Now, Interest hotels don't exist anymore, but they were the state-owned hotels. Virtually everything under the Soviets was state-owned, but this was their Interest was their state tourism properties. And so the Interest Hotel was still operational in Moscow at that time. And I checked in. And that's where I learned I think I'm up to my fourth thing now, about traveling to Moscow or Russia in general in the bad old days. And that is, there were still enough vestiges of the old system that were left that you could get a little bit of a glimpse of what it had been like under communism. Now realize that in my whole life, growing up in this town of 158 people in rural Oklahoma, I never anticipated that I would go to Moscow. I'd read so much about it, but I never anticipated that I would ever be there. So here I am, standing in the lobby of this Interest Hotel. I check in, they take all my passport information, they write it down by hand, and then they give me a room key, which is an old school key, not the cards that we use now, but an old school key with the largest key ring I had ever seen. And what I found out was that this was very common in those days in Russia, because they didn't want people running off with the key. So they would give you this huge key ring so that you would leave the key behind with a floor monitor, who I'll talk about in just a moment, before you left the hotel. So you didn't take your key out of the hotel. You dropped it with a floor monitor. And to ensure that you did that, they put it on this huge ring where there's no way you would be walking around the city with that in your pocket. So I go to my room, get sorted out, get ready to go downstairs, and this is where I meet the always effervescent and interesting floor monitor. In this case, it was a lady in uniform who sat on the floor, and her sole purpose was to make sure you didn't leave that floor with your key. That was her sole purpose. And it became, while I was there, not just in that hotel, but in other hotels in Russia, it became a game that I loved to play with these floor monitors to try to get off the floor with my key. And I will tell you that I was like 0 for 10 on that trip, because it just wasn't doable. They were good at what they did. They would track you down. They would make sure you didn't leave with that key. So I gave her my key, went downstairs, and very soon our interpreters showed up, Valeria and Victoria. Wonderful young Russian women, and little did I know when I met them the first time that would be the first of several times that we would be together, and that even to this day, they are very good friends of mine all these years later. So we're sitting there and we're talking. I introduced myself. They were quite intrigued. And we walked a little bit in the neighborhood, so to speak, to get a little bit oriented. And then we talked about the plan for the week, or the 2 weeks, rather, that I was there. And once that was over, I was just exhausted, got some sleep, woke up very early the next morning, and we were going to fly out to southern Russia that morning, so I wanted, before we left, to see Red Square. All my life I had read about Red Square. I was desperate to see this place. And so I knew it was very close. Through a lot of sign language and gyrations with the front desk staff, they pointed where Red Square is and just kept saying, close, close. Okay. So I walk out of the hotel and I can actually see Red Square. And I start walking towards it. The problem is there's a huge boulevard between me and Red Square. Multi-lane highway between me and Red Square. So I'm standing on the corner and wondering, how do I do this? Now I realize it's very early. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning. But there's still cars going up and down. So I'm standing at the corner. I finally say, okay, whatever. And I run across the first several lanes and I stop in the middle. And cars go by and they're honking and waving. And I found out later they weren't waving because they were friendly. But finally there's a break in traffic. I run across the other lanes and I'm on the other side, right at the edge of Red Square. And I walk in that square and it's snowing a little bit that morning. And when I walked in, on my left was this yellowish colored building, the GUM department store, which at that time was one of the first nice shopping centers that had been opened in Moscow after the regime change. And it was filled with designer shops. Straight ahead of me was the famed St. Basil's Cathedral before it was renovated. So it was in rough shape at that time, but it was still iconic. I couldn't believe I was standing there in front of it. On my right was the fabled tomb of Vladimir Lenin. And right behind that tomb was the fabled Kremlin. And I'm standing here taking this all in. It's early in the morning. There's very few people in Red Square. And I just began to walk the perimeter and just look at everything and take it in and take photos. And I was overwhelmed. I'll be honest with you. I was on the verge of tears because I couldn't believe I was there. I couldn't believe that all those times I sat in my room in Sharon, Oklahoma, and read about the Soviets and about Russia, about Moscow, and never thought I would ever have that experience. I was actually standing there. Perhaps you've been that way in some places that you've gone. But at any rate, I'm there, and I finish walking, and I realize I need to get back for breakfast to meet Valerie and Victoria, so I head back. This time, traffic is bad, and so I have no idea how to get across this huge boulevard. And so finally, I just run again. I run across. Get halfway, people honking, waving, honking some more. Finally, there's a break in traffic. I do it again. I run I make it to the other side, take a deep breath, and head back to the hotel for breakfast. So there we are, sitting at breakfast, and Valerie and Victoria were already down there. Frank and Winnie hadn't showed up yet, so I sat down and we started talking. They said, how did you sleep? I said, oh, fine, I was up early. I went over to Red Square. They said, really? How did you enjoy it? I said, oh, I loved it. I can't believe it's a dream of mine to see Red Square. He said, the only thing was it was very difficult getting there, because of all the lanes of traffic. And Valeria looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, well, Valerie, it's a huge boulevard between here and there. And she and Victoria began laughing so hard. And she said, let's have breakfast and then we want to show you something. So we ate our breakfast and then we left the hotel and they took me down to the corner. And we went down some steps, which was into a subway tunnel, but it was also a tunnel underneath the street. I said, you never cross the street above ground. You cross underneath and come out the other side. We walked through and we came out the other side right at the edge of Red Square. So that's when I learned the other rule. I think I'm up to 5 now. Maybe 6. I can't remember. I lost track. But bear with me. That's where I learned the another rule about traveling to Russia in the old days. And that is, very rarely would you walk across a major street above ground. That's still true today, by the way. All through Eastern and Central Europe, typically, you would walk underground. Now, I know the grid, the drill, so it's second nature to me now. But at any rate, later on that day, we left Moscow. We flew to Krasnodar, Russia, which is down in the southern part of the country. And we started our training session, and it was an amazing time. It was meeting the economic development officials down there, many of whom had been Communist Party officials before, but now we're in a new economic system that they didn't understand, and they were really drinking in the information. So everything that I was saying, they were really engaging with, except for one guy. His name was Igor, believe it or not. True story. And this guy looked like an Igor. He was a great big guy. He sat in the front and was very dour, didn't say much the entire time. Others are engaging. Even through the interpreters, you could tell that they were really understanding what I was saying. But not Igor. He just sat there. And literally, for the first 4 days of that training, he did nothing but just sit there. Like, Igor, what is going on? And I would talk to Valerie and Victoria. I said, look, what's the issue with Igor? They said, oh, he's fine. Well, he didn't look fine to me. After session on the 4th day, we were in another in-tourist hotel. And back in the old days in Russia, you could bring your own food to the hotel and they would make it for you. And so these guys had done that. They didn't have a lot of money, so they brought their food with them. And Igor and a bunch of his friends were up in a room watching the football match. After session, I'm relaxing a little bit in my room, writing up some notes. Not typing them that day, in that time, but writing them. And knock on my door. It's Valerie. She says, Igor would like us to come up and to the room where they are and watch some of the football match. I said, Valerie, are you sure we want to do this? Because this guy, he doesn't look like he's having a good time. And I just don't think he likes me. She said, no, come on. So we go up. She knocks on the door. Door opens. Igor fills this door. But he sees me. And he reaches out. He grabs me with both hands. He pulls me to him. He puts his arms around me. and he starts jumping up and down. Well, I'm 6 foot tall. I thought I was going to be 6'4" after that because he was just stretching me all over the place, jumping up and down, speaking in Russian. And that's where I found out that he really had been having a good time. He was enjoying himself very much. But he was so overwhelmed he didn't know how to express it. From that day on, Igor and I, and to this day, we still keep in contact. So many things like that happened during this trip. A little bit later in the week, it was around Easter time, and I wanted to experience Orthodox Easter. I've done that many times in the years since then, but I'd never done that before at that time, so I wanted to experience Orthodox Easter. So I convinced Valerie to take me to the Orthodox Easter service. Well, Valerie was not a believer. She didn't want to go, but she was very gracious, and so she agreed to take me. So here we are at this cathedral in central Krasnodar, and the priests are leading the worshipers around 3 times around the building to depict the 3 days that Christ was in the tomb. And then they go inside, and we go inside with them. And just a few moments after we walked inside, these very large men dressed like Cossacks, because this is a Cossack area of Russia in the south, where Gorbachev was from, as a matter of fact. They come in, they shut the doors, and they stand in front of them. So for the next about 3.5 or 4 hours, they have this service, and we're stuck there. We can't go anywhere. So we get over to the side finally, and we kind of lean over on the wall because we've been standing up a long time. And Valerie's not happy because she doesn't want to be there. And I start chuckling. She looks at me and says, "What is so funny?" And I said, "I'm trapped in a church with an atheist. You don't think that's funny?" And it did amuse her, and we caused quite a stir by trying to stop from cackling in the middle of that Easter service because of the absurdity of the situation. And finally they open the doors. We come out. We go back to the hotel. The other trainer, who my friend who had picked up his wife's passport, he finally got to the training site in Krasnodar. And he's been waiting for us all evening. He wanted to have dinner with us. He didn't know where we were. And so we didn't have cell phones in those days like we do now. So we go into the hotel. We're walking down the hall. His door opens. He sticks his head out and said, "Where have you two been?" And Valerie said, "Oh, we've been at church." And Dave very indignantly said, "Okay, if you don't want to tell me, that's fine. That's just fine." And he slams his door. He goes inside. We laughed and laughed and laughed. It was an absolute thrill ride, that entire first project. A little bit later on that week, we went to a concert toward the end of the training. All of the participants went. I'm sitting by Valerie, who's interpreting for me. Dave's sitting by Victoria. And so we're sitting there and listening to a concert by a person they call to this day, although he's deceased now, the Frank Sinatra of Russia. His name was Joseph Kapbon. And he either was a mobster or was not a mobster, depending on who you listen to, but he certainly was connected to the political elite of Russia at that time. He was a very good singer. He sang in Russian, and of course, and at one point in time, he starts singing a very beautiful song in Russian. I mean, just the melody of it was fantastic. And Valerie was interpreting for me, so she was kind of whispering the words, and it was a song called Evening Bells. And it was about a young man who was far from home. And when he would hear the church bells, when he would hear the evening bells, he would think about home. And that really hit me because I was homesick at that point in time. I'd been away for a couple weeks, and it just really resonated with me. And it was such a beautiful melody to begin with. And so she and I are talking about how beautiful that song is, and the concert ends and everyone starts to clap in unison because that's how they do it there. They clap in unison. They're bringing flowers on stage and giving them to Capmon. People are catcalling. I mean, it was very festive. And I realized that my friend Dave has been asleep most of this time. And when people start clapping, he wakes up. And he looks around. And people are up talking and they're giving Capmon roses. And Dave leans across the aisle to me. He said, Mark. But Dave, what? He said, you think they'd let me say a few words about North Carolina? And Victoria just shook her head. And Valerie just laughed and laughed. He said, no, Mr. Dave, I don't think that it would be appropriate to say anything about North Carolina at this point. Just really an interesting time. But I want to tell you about one other thing on that trip. Probably the thing that cemented in me the desire to be in the international development business more than anything else. Because up to this point, I thought this was, a few trips a year that I would do, and I'd still run chambers in the United States and go on with my U.S. career. But a few days after that, we were traveling through the mountains in southern Russia. It had been raining most of the day. We'd stopped at this village called Abinsk, and we at a roadside market, and we'd gotten as cold a Coca-Cola as they'd had. Our other traveling companion, Boris Nichiparenko, and I, we would get our picture taken with every Lenin statue we saw in the same pose. So we had stood there and gotten our picture taken in the same pose as the Lenin statue in this little town, which at that time virtually every town had one. We'd had a little bite to eat at the market. It started pouring rain, so we get in the van to head to another larger town. And while we were making that drive, people now, they've eaten, they've drank, they want to go to sleep. So most of the people in the van are asleep, except for Victoria and I. And Victoria, who had not been as gregarious as Valerie, she and I talked, but not to the extent that Valerie and I had. And very timidly almost, she asked me, Mr. Mark, what did they tell you about Russians when you were growing up? And I told her that, we were told that the Russians were our enemies and that they wanted to destroy our way of life. And that they had nuclear weapons that could destroy everything. We even had nuclear drills at our school. So our perception of the Russians was very much different than what I was seeing during my trip. I said, what about you? What did they teach you about Americans? And she said, well, a lot of the same thing. And she said, but we were told that we should hate Americans because Americans wanted to exterminate us. And she paused for a while, and then she she leaned forward and said, "But I never hated Americans because I never knew an American until now. How can you hate somebody when you don't know them? How can you hate somebody because they tell you to hate somebody? It never made sense to me." She said, "I graduated and got married, and I married a naval officer. And we were very much in love. We had our daughter, and we didn't have much, but we had a little apartment, and we were happy. But things were changing at that time," she said, and our former government was dissolving. And there was a thaw in relations with the United States. And so they picked some of the naval officers to go to U.S. Navy bases in the United States and jointly train with the U.S. Navy. And my husband was picked. And so he made the trip. He was very concerned about it. But he and a few others made the trip to the United States. And they spent several weeks there. And when he came back, we sat in our apartment. And he said, "Victoria, we've been lied to." And I said, "What? What do you mean? Sasha, what do you mean?" He said, the Americans are not what we were told. They welcomed me. They laughed with me. They helped me. They have all these modern things. They have everything that we don't have, that we always wished to have. And yet, they didn't treat us like enemies. They treated us like their friends, almost from day one. And we've been lied to. And this changed, she said, Sasha's whole worldview, and he never could get over it. And so he decided that he was going to leave the Navy. He was going to resign from the Navy. And he made that known. She said, and that's when everything went wrong. Because then we were ostracized. The friends we'd had forever, for all the years that he'd been in the Navy, they evaporated overnight. He became a pariah because he had stood up and said that maybe Americans weren't who we thought they were. And even though the government had changed, it was still a lot of distrust and a lot of the old ways. And things got worse and worse. And he was being ridiculed at work. And he just wanted to be free of the Navy so that we could go on with our lives. And he was under so much stress. And we had this little apartment. It was dark all the time. And one day he said, let's get some air. Let's take the baby out and let's take a walk to the park and get some air. And so we bundled up the baby and we started walking to the park. And just as we got to the park, we see some of my husband's former friends, naval officers. And they began hurling abuses. And she said my husband was under so much stress that he started talking back to them. And they came over and one thing led to another. And she said, and she started crying then. I'll never forget it, sitting in that van, driving through the rainy mountains and seeing the tears streaming down her face. She said, I never saw the knife. But one of them stabbed him 2 or 3 times. And he went down on the sidewalk and I was screaming and they ran away and I was screaming for help and no one would help. And I was screaming and screaming. She said, and my husband was dead. Over nothing. Over calling out the lies that we'd been told. I put my hand on her shoulder to console her, and she paused for several seconds, and then she said, you know, I never hated Americans because Americans never did anything to me. But the Soviets, my own government, I hated them because they took everything away from me. That was something I to this day, will still make me tear up almost, because it was so indicative of what their life was like in those days. And once the veil had been torn and they were able to see reality, even then, many chose not to accept it. The end of that trip was surreal. I was getting ready to leave, to fly back to the United States. And this was before 9/11. Security was a lot more lax in those days than it is now. And I was standing at the airport, and some of the participants in the training showed up, Igor being one of them. And as I was getting ready to check in, he gave me a something wrapped in newspaper. He said, through Valerie, the interpreter, he said, this is a gift for you. And I looked at it, and he said, unwrap it. So I unwrapped it, and it was a smoked fish. I had no idea how I was going to get a smoked fish home, or what I would do with it when I got it home. But I looked at Valerie, and she was emotional. And she leaned over to me, she whispered to me, this is the best thing that he has. He could take that and feed his family and have a party, but he's given it to you. This is the best thing that he has. Wow. I'll never forget that. And right then, I knew that my life was never going to be the same. Right then, I knew that I couldn't go back to running chambers of commerce in the United States and making rich people richer. Right then, I knew, and I didn't know when it would be, but I knew that one part of my life was coming to a close, or one part of my career was coming to a close, and another was opening. That door opened, just like I said in the first episode of this podcast. The door opened, and I walked through it into the unknown. I had many more trips to Russia after that, and I'm going to talk about them in some of the podcasts that are coming up. But I really wanted to focus this one on the first trip, because that's what really created in me the desire to step away from almost 15 years of running chambers of commerce and economic development authorities in the United States and step into the unknown, into this international development business. And it was something that I never regretted. Now I look back now and I see it as one of the really great things that happened to me, but it was because I was willing to take that risk and to walk through that open door. So I want to leave you with this. What do you take from all of these stories? I said, you can say, oh, Mark, this is your experience, this is your life. I mean, how does this apply to me? Well, I think it does. Because all of us come to points in our life when we have the opportunity to make a change. We have the opportunity to take that step into the future that's going to propel us to something great. We have the chance to make those connections, or to gain that knowledge. And yet many times we're afraid. And so we stay where we are. And we accept the crumbs that fall on the floor from the table instead of eating the beautiful buffet that life can offer. Now, in no way am I ridiculing those who are conservative and who like their life and who want to continue their life as it is. Absolutely, you should do that. You should do what makes you happy. But always know, too, that doors will open in your life. And if you're willing to walk through those doors, there may be something amazing on the other side. I think now about what my life would have been had I not walked through that open door into the international development business. And I'm sure that there would have been success. I loved doing what I was doing. I loved running chambers of commerce, but walking through that door was so transformational. And I'm sitting here now surrounded by things in this office from a career of walking through open doors and meeting some of the most amazing people in the world and better understanding different religions and different cultures and different ethnicities and being able to really have a worldview that allowed me to enrich my life and enrich my family's life, not monetarily, but from the standpoint of how we viewed the world. But there's a lot of fear in that, right? There's a lot of fear in walking through that open door. But I can tell you, fear is always going to be there. And you can do two things when you face it. You can fear everything and run, or you can face everything and rise. And if you do the latter, the transformation that you go through could be the thing that propels your life and career for far into the future. So, that was my first trip to Russia. We're going to unpack some more things in the upcoming episodes because I did so many trips to Russia in the beginning. But I want to leave you with this. Things change. We'll talk about this in future episodes, but a lot's changed in Russia today. Some for the good. Modernization certainly taking place. But some that's not good. Right now, we've got a debilitating war in Ukraine, an illegal invasion by Russia into Ukraine. And I'm not making a political statement, but simply Russia invaded a sovereign nation. And those days when Russia was trying to get its footing and trying to really understand capitalism and a democratic way of life have given way to many of the vestiges of the old government coming back in a different way. And we'll talk more about that in future episodes. So we're going to unpack this Russian experience, and we're going to learn a lot about the culture, more about the people. We're going to learn some leadership lessons along the way. But I hope that this has been a good introduction to you through the lens of my very first trip to that country in 1997. There's not a day that goes by when I don't think of Valerie and Victoria, Igor, Sasha, and Boris Nichiparenko, who's unfortunately passed away now. I think about them with gladness, with joy in some ways, but also with sadness for reasons that I will tell you about in future episodes. Until then, take care. Blessings to all of you. Join me next time on some stops along the way. And if you haven't already, you can get the book, Some Stops Along the Way, Amazon.com. Beginning June the 2nd, I will put the link when it goes live. I'll put the link in the podcast chat that week. And also, subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. We're going to take a fun journey. It's going to start in Russia, but it's going to go all over the world, and it's going to be amazing. Take it with me. See you next time on Some Stops Along the Way.